me a minute. I want to take your time. Look. Okay, can you swear here? Can you swear? Okay. Fuck the Oscars, you know? Fuck the Oscars! Fuck you!
This man is Josef Fares. Many might have gotten aware of his existence due to this little passionate outburst he had at the 2017 Video Game Awards. But Josef Fares is actually a pretty interesting person. Because yes, this is indeed the same man who directed one of the most touching video games I've ever had the pleasure of playing. Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, of which this video will be about. Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons released in 2013. The game was developed in collaboration by Josef Fares and a Swedish development studio Starbreeze. Josef Fares is originally a movie director, and this was his directorial debut for a video game. While I was doing some further research on the guy, I found out to my big surprise that I've actually seen and very much liked two of the movies he has directed, Jalla Jalla and Kopps, both very fun Swedish comedy films. The way the controls work in Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons is what makes it interesting. The gameplay is almost like a single-player co-op game, if that makes any sense, since the player controls both of the brothers simultaneously, and pretty much all the sections in the game require the teamwork of the two brothers for you to complete a given section. The left stick of your controller moves the older brother, while the right stick moves the younger brother. The left and right triggers of your controller are interaction buttons for the brothers, and the shoulder buttons rotate the camera left and right. The difficulty of the game's problem-solving sections remains quite tame throughout the game, which I think is actually good for it, since I bet learning these outlandish controls will be more than enough challenge for most players. After all, it's highly likely that your first playthrough of this game is going to be your last, since the game doesn't have almost any apparent replay value. While the controls of the game aren't exactly complex, they take a bit to get used to, since the game plays very differently from anything else out there, and I don't think anyone's first thought about how the game controls is going to be, wow, this feels fluid. The controls can feel a bit clunky and unresponsive at times. However, in its short length of roughly 3 hours of playtime that the game offers, it squeezes quite a bit out of this gameplay concept and constantly introduces new kind of scenarios for the player where this unique control scheme comes to play in different ways. Both of the brothers also have their strengths and weaknesses, making this gameplay style more interesting. The older brother is stronger, being able to carry and interact with heavier objects, while the younger brother is physically weaker of the two and cannot swim, but can fit into tiny spaces due to his smaller size. However, since the game puts a lot of emphasis on the physical differences of the older and younger brother, and these differences of the brothers feel logical in great majority of the game's sections, I have to nitpick on one of the sections of the game. There's a part of the game where the brothers are tied to each other with a rope, and you need to swing the brothers in turns, so while one of the brothers swings to the next grabbable surface, the other one holds onto the wall. In this section, the game completely forgets that the younger brother is supposed to be physically weaker than the older brother, and he can hold the whole older brother's body weight just fine. It's really just a nitpick, since the gameplay in that section was actually really fun, but it was rather immersion breaking because the game breaks its own logic so badly. While we are already talking about the game breaking its own logic, there's also this weird moment in the game where the younger brother drops into the water and older brother needs to swim to rescue him. For some odd reason, in this moment you need to push both triggers down for older brother to grab and save the younger brother. That doesn't fit at all with the situation at hand, since the younger brother is unconscious. So it would make sense that only pushing the left trigger down, that is the action button for the older brother, would do the trick. So I cannot understand the reasoning behind the controls in this particular section. All the dialogue in the game is had in a made-up language. This decision works well for the game, since the emotions it tries to communicate to the players are universal, and everyone has enough imagination to understand what the characters in the game are trying to say. I could easily imagine some of the moments in the game becoming just a bit too cheesy if there would be some generic dialogue added in. The game doesn't focus on what is said, it focuses on what is felt by the players themselves. I think that might sound a bit melodramatic, but what I'm trying to say hopefully makes sense in the end of this video. When looking at the visuals of the game, it's quite apparent that Brothers is not a big budget production. However, this rather low-poly art style has a lot of charm to it, and enough detail to bring the game world alive, and still offers some undeniably gorgeous sights for the player, accompanied with a beautiful string-heavy soundtrack composed by Gustaf Grefberg. I did sometimes get this problem of missing textures or black textures popping where they don't belong though. That can be, again, rather immersion breaking. I also have to mention that I'm not personally a big fan of the huge black outlines appearing on the top and the bottom of the screen whenever the control is taken away from the player. It's not a huge thing, but I feel it's rather ugly and unnecessary visual effect. So, the game as a product is not perfect, but it does something really well, and that is telling a touching story in a unique way using its gameplay mechanics. This game might look like one of those games that you should just watch a playthrough of, but that would be the worst decision you could do. And not because there are things you could spoil to yourself about its story, which there obviously are. You can, however, no doubt find stories similar to this one elsewhere. But the way the game tells its story through its controls is something you can't feel anywhere else. It absolutely needs to be played, not just watched. In order for me to explain this point further, I must give a massive spoiler warning here if you still want to experience the game, which I highly recommend you to do if you already haven't. The game opens up with a cutscene that has the younger brother grieving next to a grave. A brief flashback is shown here where the younger brother witnesses his mother drown, unable to help her. After this short opening cutscene, the brothers start their journey to find an antidote for their father, who has fallen ill with a deadly disease. If it wouldn't be for the starting cutscene, the game would seem very light-hearted for the whole first third of the game, since a lot of time is spent in beautiful environments with helpful people and creatures inhabiting them, and even the so-called evil creatures come off as rather cartoonish. But don't be fooled, this is not a happy game. The opening cutscene does serve a purpose in explaining what kind of mental struggles the younger brother has to deal with, and why he is so afraid of the water. This is further emphasized later on in the game, in a section where the younger brother goes unconscious for a moment, and has a dream where he sees a gigantic figure of his mother having a grip on his dying father. When he tries to call the older brother for help, he just starts to beat him and strangle him violently, suggesting that the younger brother still feels heavy guilt for his mother's death, and at least subconsciously believes that his brother secretly holds a grudge over him for it. When you progress through the game, a strong sense of connection is formed between the brothers, and the player feels this through the controls. As individuals, the brothers could not do this journey alone, but together they can overcome even the toughest obstacles they face on their path. At the tail end of their journey, the brothers rescue a girl from a primitive tribe that tries to sacrifice her in some sort of ritual. After a short while of traveling as a trio instead of duo, this girl turns out to be something else than what the brothers thought she is. As a little side note here, this is completely the fault of the brothers themselves, since there were some not so subtle signs that this lady might have something to hide. The younger brother is a bit skeptical about her, but you know those teenagers and their sex drive, so there's no stopping the older brother from being completely mesmerized by the girl. In the end, the older brother doesn't get laid, however, but after a struggle against the monster, he gets stung by its venomous stinger. The brothers take a tumble that takes them miraculously to the magical tree that has the antidote against their father's illness. However, the older brother himself is now in near-death condition due to the poisoning, so the younger brother must rush up to the tree and retrieve the antidote. He does succeed in finding the antidote, but when he returns to the older brother, he has already passed away, and the left side of the controller goes unresponsive. If this wasn't sad enough on its own, the game actually makes you bury the older brother in a painful drawn-out moment where the horrible situation really sinks deep, since you the player will control all of it. Saying that this moment here was touching for me the first time around would be a huge understatement. It broke my goddamn heart. The game is not over yet, however, and with the help of a friend from earlier in the game, the younger brother continues his attempt to still save his father. He ends up in a situation where there's no other way for him than to swim through the water he is so afraid of. You cannot do this by using the buttons on the right side of the controller, but using the now dead older brother's side of the controller, the younger brother is able to overcome his fears, probably realizing that if he doesn't even try now, he has nothing more left to lose. At this point I was basically chanting to myself, "Don't let the father be dead, don't let the father be dead." But luckily the younger brother makes it in time to deliver the antidote to his father. The game ends with a bittersweet cutscene that leaves some questions hanging in the air. The younger brother and his father are now grieving next to two graves, and the father completely collapses in tears while the younger brother stands there near emotionless. Was the whole journey the brothers went through worth it in the first place? Will the younger brother be overcome with guilt again and blame himself for the death of his brother as he did with his mother? After all, the game does imply earlier that the older brother might have been the father's favorite son, while the younger brother was more of a mama's boy. Or did the younger brother, as implied by the ending gameplay sequence, perhaps grow stronger due to these hardships he went through and finally found himself as an individual? As I said earlier, why the ending is as powerful as it is, it's not because the game tells a sad story, it's because the controls make the player actually feel the events as well. The game takes its time forming this feeling on the player of the bond between the two brothers, and then takes it away in an absolutely soul-crushing moment. This is something you cannot feel by simply watching a playthrough of this game. When you think about a movie director coming to try their wings in the video game industry, something like The Last of Us would probably pop into mind first when thinking about what they would want to produce. That's why it's so amazing to me that a first-time video game director coming from a film industry would make a game like Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, which tells its story of teamwork, loss and self-growth through gameplay in such a unique and effective way like this. Josef Fares is currently working on his second game, A Way Out, with Hazelight Studios, that again aims to be something quite different than what we're used to seeing in video games these days. And while his passion can sometimes lead to outbursts like this, it also created moments like these. So I will be eagerly waiting for whatever Josef Fares creates in the future. Thank you for watching, and take care.